Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out tonight, and welcome to Unmasking Hampton Roads. This is our second program in the Unmasking Hampton Roads series. This is presented in partnership with the Hampton Roads Community Foundation as well as Virginia Humanities. My name is Samantha Willis. I'm a Richmond-based journalist and also co-creator of the Unmasking series. I am so appreciative that all of you have joined us here again tonight. How many people were at our kickoff event last week? Okay, oh wow, so we have a good portion of you that returned. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And we are just excited to see you all tonight. We have a dynamite panel coming up to share a range of experiences about how race and racism have shaped this region in the past, in the present, and then how we can decide how it shapes our future. So right now, I'm gonna turn the program over to Ms. Vivian Oden. Vivian is Vice President for Special Projects at the Hampton Roads Community Foundation, as well as co-creator of Unmasking Hampton Roads.
Thank you, Samantha. Good evening. Good evening. I'm excited and I'm honored to introduce our moderator for the evening, award-winning journalist Anita Blanton. Anita joined the WAVY TV 10 WVBT Fox 43 family from KOCO-TV in Oklahoma City, where she served as a morning anchor for 4 years. She anchors WAVY News at 5 p.m., 6 p.m., and 11 p.m., as well as WAVY News 10 at 10 p.m. on Fox 43. She began her journalism career as a reporter at KTXS-TV in Abilene, Texas, before heading to Central Texas to work at KWTX-TV in Waco, Texas, and WRIC-TV in Richmond, Virginia. Anita is a proud alumna of Hampton University in Hampton, Virginia, and a former Miss Hampton University. She earned a Bachelor's of Arts degree in Broadcast Journalism and Political Science from the Scripps Howard School of Journalism and Communications, and she was named to the inaugural Top 40 Under 40 class of alumni. Anita is the member of National Association of Black Journalists and my soror as member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. Without further ado, I present to you our moderator for the evening, Anita Blanton.
Some things were going to get chopped out of that bio, but I knew Delta was not. Well, it's good to be here with you all this evening. As I look out on the crowd right now, it's a beautiful thing to see the diversity of the crowd. When you have a conversation like this, it's important that we get everyone at the table to have a different view of things and just to see the beauty in that, to see where people have come from, their backgrounds, to get to where they are today, for us all to be in this auditorium today together. So I'm excited about the panel discussion that we have for this evening. I do have 2 more shows to get to tonight, so I'm not going to hold you all night. It's going to be my job to try to move things along throughout the program. But Unmasking Hampton Roads, that's what we're talking about tonight. This is a dialogue. We're going to have our panelists. We'll also have questions from the audience. I have some prepared questions here, and then we're going to take some from online. So let's get to things. Let me introduce you to our esteemed guests that we have with us as our panelists for this evening. I'll begin with Julian Baena. He is the president of the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce of Coastal Virginia. Julian Baena received a master's in business administration from St. Leo University after serving in the United States Marine Corps. Thank you for your service. Julian is the vice president and co-founder of the Legacy Business Advisors Mid-Atlantic, where they offer strategic assistance to closely held business owners focusing on growth, capital acquisition, business valuations, continuity, succession, and exit planning. He is residing in Norfolk with 2 children. Let's again welcome Julian Baena. Our next guest is Kayla Walker. Kayla is a peer facilitator and alumnus of Teens with a Purpose and spoken word artist. She fights for social injustice throughout the arts, a graduating senior at Norfolk State University, and a fourth grade teacher at Tidewater Park Elementary. Kayla is very active with her community through community relationships with Teens with a Purpose, Planned Parenthood, and the Sociology Club. Dr. Amelia Ross-Hammond, the founder and chairwoman of the African American Cultural Center of Virginia Beach, former Virginia Beach councilwoman. The Honorable Dr. Amelia Ross-Hammond retired from Norfolk State University as Distinguished Professor Emeritus of Music and Director of Service Learning and Civic Engagement. She holds a doctorate of Philosophy and Education Leadership, Curriculum and Instruction, with a minor in ethnomusicology from the University of Denver, a master's in music education from College of New Jersey, and a Bachelor of Science in Music Education from Ithaca College. Did you just finish school? Let's welcome again Dr. Amelia Ross-Hammond. Dr. Patricia Turner, a member of the Norfolk 17 and retired veteran educator. Somebody said, wow, as I said that. Yes, civil rights pioneer and educator Patricia Turner was born on October 11th, 1944 in Norfolk, Virginia. In 1959, 5 years after Brown versus Board of Education, Turner and her brother entered Norview Junior High School, a previously all-white high school. Now, the siblings were two of the 5 students who attended Norview Junior School. The siblings were two after that point who finished 8th grade. Turner went to Norview High School, where she graduated near the top of her class of over 400 seniors. She worked as a nurse before moving to Pennsylvania, where she worked for the Thomas Jefferson Hospital. She then moved back to Virginia and worked for Dr. Robert Jefferson Johnson, a pediatrician. She continued her education and attended Norfolk State University. Where are the Hampton grads? No, I'm playing. She has an MS degree in education from Old Dominion University and took classes toward a PhD degree at the College of William and Mary. Let's hear it again for Dr. Patricia Turner. Forrest Hap White, author of Black, White, and Brown, The Battle for Progress in the 1950s Norfolk. Dr. Forrest Hap White grew up in Norfolk and a family active in community and civic affairs. His father, pediatrician Dr. Forrest P. White, served as president of the Norfolk Committee for Public Schools. Now, the White Citizens Group that lobbied for reopening Norfolk's closed schools during the massive resistance crisis of 1958 through 59 and filed the critical lawsuits that eventually destroyed Virginia's separate but equal doctrine as it applied to public schools. Hap served for 7 years as the ombudsman and as a chief in the Consumer Protection Division of Norfolk City Government before moving on to become budget director for Norfolk Public Schools for 11 years. His award-winning doctoral dissertation at ODU on the desegregation era was published in 1971 and republished last year as Black, White, and Brown, The Battle for Progress in 1950s Norfolk. Let's hear it again for Hap White. Lavelle White, educator and speaker. He's a mentor, motivational speaker who has worked in the public school system for more than 20 years. Born and raised in Norfolk, he is the son of a Norfolk 17 member, Patricia Godbolt White. He is a proud alumnus of Booker T. Washington High School. He earned a Bachelor of Science degree from James Madison University and a Master of Arts degree in Psychology and Counseling from Regent University. In addition to his daily duties as a school counselor, he currently serves as the Virginia Beach City Public Schools Discipline Appeals Committee and the VBCPS Office of Student Leadership's Code of Student Conduct Review Committee. He resides in Virginia Beach with his wife and 2 daughters. Let's hear it again for Lavelle White. So can we get down to things? All right. Again, we want to thank each and every one of you all for being a part of the discussion tonight. Just reading over your bios, you already know it's going to be a good discussion, right? So as we begin here, some of these are going to be directed towards specific people, but we want to let you know that you can feel free to hop in wherever you feel comfortable as well. Again, we are on a time limit, but still, please hop in if you feel like you have something else to add to the discussion here. We're going to begin here as we take a look back and look forward. 60 years ago, during the height of massive resistance when schools across the state closed rather than integrate, a group of 17 young people became the first Black students to attend formerly whites-only schools in Norfolk. So how does that history of inequity and discrimination influence our educational landscape today in Norfolk and other schools across the region? Also, what gains have we made in terms of education access and equity in the region? So of course, you know where we're gonna begin. Dr. Patricia Turner.
That's really kind of like a hit-in-the-face question. 60 years ago, Norfolk didn't look like this. There were places, if you were of color, that you couldn't go. But the places that you could go, there was love, there was unity. Now, integration comes along. I attended Ruffner Junior High, 7th grade. I had to take 2 buses. That was no fun. The school was not up to standards of the school that I was to go to next. It was amazing to me that in order to walk to school, I had to take 3 tests. I had to go to psychiatrists. I had to be interviewed by the school board. It was not fun. You see, when we went to court, and we went every day for a week, it's amazing that the students of today can go to school anywhere they want to. And I had to go through so much in order to walk to school. Now, how has things changed? Not that much. The schools are going back to being segregated. The children do not have anyone, I assume, to encourage them. You see, when I was in court, I was refused to be one of the students to integrate the schools because my high school reading level was on high school, and I hadn't attended the 8th grade yet. My math skills were on college level, so they said I was unbalanced. And the judge said, wait a minute, how many of you can do college math? And the court got a little bit quiet, so I was sent through. But the students today, they still have good teachers. Because in order to be a teacher, you're not in it for the money, because you're not gonna get any. You've got to be in it for the love of children. I do believe that 60 years ago, today, children need parents, not $200 shoes. So I believe that a teacher loves teaching. I know I myself, I don't see color, I see goodness.
Dr. Hap-White?
Well, my view, I grew up at the same time as Pat did and witnessed the battle in the white community and how vociferous they were in fighting against integration. Growing up in Norfolk, two things impressed you. One was the vehemence of the fight against desegregation. And the second was the massive scale of destruction of the city from redevelopment. And I knew there had to be a link. So that was the basis of my doctoral dissertation, that in Norfolk and most other southern cities, the whole response to desegregation took two phases. The first phase was in the early 50s. White leaders realized that separate could not be equal. And so, well, separate could be equal, but they needed to make it equal. So there's a real commitment to build new communities and new schools. In black communities like Norfolk, build them integration-proof communities, Young Park, Tidewater Park, so forth. The new schools were built there. There was a real effort at that point. Then when the Brown decision hit, a complete reversal, new group took control of politics, and they were bent on destroying any place where blacks and whites lived in close proximity. The Redevelopment Housing Authority tore down the homes of 20,000 people in Norfolk in 13 months, including the homes of all the plaintiffs in the original lawsuits. And these were not slums that they tore down. Some of these, like Broad Creek Village, were Navy housing, only 10 years old, indoor plumbing, central heat, all the other kinds of things. That was the effort there. Then from there on, there was a concerted effort by all levels of government to divide our community, to use interstate highways to enforce the color line, to use city planning, city school zones, locations. Norfolk built six-room schoolhouses, hoping they would be integration-proof. We still have a few of them around today. We still have the location of where we put things, how our infrastructure did, how we put ODU to divide Lambert's Point from Larchmont and so forth. Some of those scars are still there to make it more difficult for us to be united as a community. I agree with Pat that the educators are the ones that make a difference. And one of the unique things that came out of that whole 58, 59 struggle is not only almost all of the Norfolk 17 went in to be educators, so many of the white students that had been out of school realized how important public schools were, that there was no higher calling. Mm-hmm. You, unfortunately, a lot of us have retired, and you've got a whole new generations taking over. But there was no higher calling than to be a school teacher. And I think it also had an impact on the leadership of the community. They saw how important public schools were and how important it was to keep them open. And so Norfolk didn't tip become an all-black school system like Richmond or Atlanta or Washington or Baltimore or all the other cities on the East Coast. There was, because of the school crisis, there was that coterie of support that we needed schools in order to have a business community, in order to have a society that worked together, that public schools were the key. I think we've lost some of that impetus, and we need to pull it back together. I think that's the second part of the program. So.
Isn't it amazing to hear the perspective? You know, we're in a very transit community, and so people are coming in and out all the time, whether it's military or something else that brought you here to the area, and just to hear these stories, even of where things sit, That's very interesting to hear those things. You know, if you didn't grow up in this area or haven't been in this area long, you may not know that. And that's eye-opening when you think about that. And we're going to come back to that for sure, about where things sit. And that's a good discussion that brings us even to today. Lavelle, did you want to hop in there as well?
Yes. Just thinking about the fact that, you know, I was fortunate enough to have a mother, I said, was one of the Norfolk 17. She shared with all of us her story, you know, and the journey. And I think we've become very comfortable resting on equality, that we don't realize it's not the same as equity. You know, when you're talking about an equitable education, that's a totally different ball game. You know, so we're going from acknowledging what's happened to capacity building to action. A lot of times I've seen a lot of school divisions and agencies that get very comfortable with talking about the equality and the access to education. When it comes to the equitable practices and financial supports, if you will, within those divisions, that's a totally different story. So when I see, you know, our young men and our students within our, you know, school division, you know, I definitely hear my mother. You know, I mean, like I said, she was an educator of 43 years, and myself being in year number 23, I understand the history. However, a lot of our young people, you know, to your point, do not. And to be honest with you, I can't put that totally on them. You know, it really rests on our shoulders, you know, to share with our young people why they have the access, you know, that they do to an education. So this way we can give them, and I choose to give them the tough love and say, hey, listen, I can't encourage you to be late to class. And they say, Mr. White, why not? Well, let me tell you. You know, so in my office, I have some things that my mother had, you know, as well when she was teaching, her School Bell Award from Norfolk Public Schools and some other things as a reminder. So I always take an opportunity to share with our young people the struggle in the story. And one thing that my mother, and I know we have to get to another question, you know, always impressed upon me, she said, Lavelle, know this. She said, I desegregated. She said, but I never feel I integrated until there are no longer the disproportionalities in data with regards to suspension rates and gifted placement and those type of things. So as long as those things exist, there's definitely still work to be done.
Very good points, very good points. Let's move on to arts and some cultural movements. Historically, they have contributed to public memory efforts in the Hampton Roads region, and we want to ask, how can visual and performance art be utilized to tell a more inclusive story of today's Hampton Roads? And this is going to Kayla and also Dr. Amelia Ross-Hammond.
Hey everybody. Hey. So being a spoken word artist, you know, I've been a spoken word artist for the last 10 years, traveling, not just traveling, but really speaking up at different forums. Like example, I think it was last year or 2 years ago when they tried to bring that that prison into Chesapeake. It was me and my peers, like between 18 to 22, who stood on that solid ground, did poetry, sung songs to let them know, like, hey, like, we don't want this here. You know what I'm trying to say? Like, we don't want this. We want, you know, more recs open. We want to be on eye level with the police officers. This is what we want. So poetry, the arts go a long way, because sometimes people are not going to want to have difficult conversations like this. Sometimes what I learned, especially with poetry, like confrontation is not for everybody. But if you can say it in a poem, or if you can say it in a song, and you know, people will listen more, because it will attract their attention, like, oh, that was a nice poem. This is what my poem was about. This was what my song was about. So it eases into a conversation that you might not want to stand in front of somebody and have. So the arts and visual arts is super important, especially in this movement.
And going on further, I'm in Virginia Beach. And one of the things I noticed when I came in about 1991, that more of the art and culture was more Eurocentric in presentation. But what the city has done is they have made a plan, which is the Arts 2030 plan, to bring in more cultural diversity, because they realize in Virginia Beach, the African American youth are growing twice the amount in that city, the national, up to 9%. And with this group, as well as the Hispanic, we are bringing in, because of the military presence, we have that variety in. And if we're going to continue being a vibrant, inclusive city, we need to show this. So this is why I'm pleased that when I brought this up while I was on city council, I said, this community needs to reflect who we all are. And I said that we have African Americans who were brought here prior to 1619. We have a church 425 years old. So a lot of the young people, because the average youth are between 25 to 45 years, and they're coming in, they don't know a lot of the history. We have to be the repository to share this, because that not only impacts them through the arts, it impacts them educationally, because suddenly they realize we had all these achievements happening. We had all of the arts, and this is what we started with the African American Culture Center, and its mission is to educate, to inform, using the arts, because that's one part. From little, you see the kids dancing, they're moving, they're singing, and that impacts public memory. And if you look back, they used to have where you hear about the barber shops. That's called group memory, because you get in there and you're talking to someone else, oh yeah, I remember Aunt so-and-so, and then things pass along, they hum and sing. And those were ways that bridged the gap of what happened over the years coming across. Because our first African Americans came here via West Indies. And then later, when they really needed that slave trade more, they went over. And a lot of these people had I call it social death. Because you're brought from one city, from one village to the next, till you get to the port, where suddenly the complete disconnection of your community. And they began to use the culture, the arts, that singing to bring things happening. And the city is realizing more and more, if they plan to be a vibrant city economically, we need to look and reflect this. So the arts is important, and it is big business. Just in Virginia Beach alone, did a study, over $7 million in the art industry. And I'm sure you heard of something in the water and all of this that's going on. It's bringing that through. So we need to capitalize and leverage that to use it throughout the different school systems. And that is helping bring more equity, because people are all involved and you're so busy enjoying and listening and learning, you forget sometimes to fight.
And today, children start learning at a very young age. I am now co-director of Oakwood Academy. We have preschoolers. And if we would teach them culture, art, that songs are more than a rap song, but it has a meaning in it, you would be surprised at a 2-year-old who repeats something. They may not understand at 2, but they start saying it at 2. By 4, they begin to bring meaning to this. And they can see a picture for more than what they're looking at and see beyond it and learn. But we need to start teaching the children.
So I just want to provide a little bit of different perspective. So I want to add what everybody said, because it is true. Communication, education, our youth. For us within the Hispanic community, what I've observed is that all of these things really make a huge impact in keeping our identity, especially culturally. For example, we have a grassroots festival every year through the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, and we provide cultural dancers from Panama, Peru, Dominican Republic, just different countries, because although we're all Hispanic, each country is different. And even within each country, there's so many variances within the culture that it's important to show off a lot of it. Because honestly, it doesn't matter where you're from, there's a couple of things that are common. And dance and music and food brings the community together. So for us, it's really important, not only in that respect, but also our Panamanian dancers. I think the average age for them, there's about 7 ladies, I believe. I think their average age is about 72. And so I always kid with them, like, hey, where are you going to find the young dancers to pass on the baton? But what's sad is that we don't have it. Sometimes our youth don't realize how important that culture is. And that it is important for them to kind of pick up the baton and say, hey, this is what we are about, and this is where our communities are built from. So I just wanted to.
Oh, I think that's an excellent point. And you talk about passing the baton. I mean, even today, we're sitting in this auditorium today, as we have found out this morning about the death of Representative Elijah Cummings. You know, the people of that generation, when you see, you know, that they are passing away, who's next? You got to ask that question, who's next? Is someone ready to be next? And I think that goes for every aspect of our community, where you have to ask, who's getting the baton? Who's ready to take the baton from those who have, you know, been trailblazers for us, you know, over the years? You've led us into another question here, and that's, in what ways have immigrant communities contributed to the social and economic development of the Hampton Roads region in Norfolk and Virginia Beach specifically?
So we have made a huge impact. So I always like to brag specifically about immigrant business owners and entrepreneurs, because to me, their work ethic is just unbelievable. You take an individual that's raised in a different country. Sometimes they come here legally, sometimes they don't. But if they don't come here legally, they don't speak the language, don't have the papers, but somehow figure out a way to raise enough money from their aunts, brothers, uncles, sisters, whoever it may be, to start a business. Not literally going down to the courthouse and say, hey, I need a business license, and not knowing how to do it. And then they start a business, and then they succeed through sheer hard work and determination and persistence. And when I talk to them, it makes me really proud, because I'm like, man, that is a hardworking business owner, and I would not want to do business with anybody but that type of person. But let's kind of go back a little bit. So Hampton Roads, last time they did the census, I think was 1.2 million or so, give or take. Hispanic community makes up about 8% of that. We'll round up to 10, easy math. So about 120,000 Hispanics. That's not counting undocumented. And for this 2020 census that's coming up, I think they projected close to 180,000. By 2030, we're going to be over 300,000 Hispanics within the Hampton Roads region.
Wow.
Across the country, we contribute $1.3 trillion to the GDP. That is not a small number, and that's only one community. When you include the Asian community, the Filipino community, the Black community, those are staggering numbers. And it's now very common that you find mixed and blended families. So whether you're talking to somebody who may be white, they're going to participate in all the other communities, because more than likely they might be married or have a relative or somebody who's married, and they get exposed to it. And there's so many beautiful things about all the different cultures that they get attracted to it. So we contribute immensely. 55,000 small businesses are owned by first-generation Hispanic entrepreneurs. 150,000 businesses, and 1.2 million that are both. So those are pretty big numbers that make an impact on the community. SBA says there's 30.1 million businesses in operation today, and small businesses make up 80% of our commerce here locally. So that's the type of impact that all the different communities make to our local economy.
It's amazing. And do you feel like you all are justly recognized for such?
It's tough. So we don't see that through the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce as much as we'd like to, and we're really trying to improve that. Some of it is because culturally, within the Hispanic community, we're not accustomed to it.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes we don't know. You don't know what you don't know, right? And sometimes people are just afraid to kind of put their business out there because they're like, oh man, I don't want anybody to, I just kind of want to do my job and go on with my life. But we're really trying to make a push within the community to start saying, hey, look, we are really involved. We make an impact.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, you guys need to participate, and we need to be recognized for our efforts.
Well, we're certainly glad to have a Hispanic chamber, here in Hampton Roads. In many ways, Hampton Roads has a rich cultural history, we all know that, of reflecting the diversity of the area. That could be argued. Even in the days of legalized segregation, though. In Norfolk, in particular, African Americans entertain themselves very well with the Addicts Theater, which is celebrating 100 years. They pulled in some national talents from the beginning. We're talking about Billie Holiday, Marian Anderson, Cab Calloway. Today, many organizations are creating programming with inclusion in mind. So, for example, the Chrysler Museum has a community engagement officer whose job it is to lure in groups who historically felt excluded. That's just one example. It also stopped charging admission years ago to get more people to come. Virginia Stage Company designs and puts on shows that reflect local history. And my question to you, and this is to all of you, have you seen the results of these efforts? And if not, why aren't more minority communities responding to the initiatives that people are trying to put together?
Well, I think there has been some responses. In Virginia Beach, as I mentioned, you can see some of the difference. We have an Office of Cultural Affairs, and they continue to bring in data about how things are going. And we have the Commission, the Arts and Humanities, that try to support through grants to make some of these happen. I'll give you an example of what we're doing at the Cultural Center. Even though we do not have our building up yet, we have land.
What's your expected date to be open for it?
We're looking at trying to turn the earth by 2021.
Okay.
But we were able to show through data the importance of this process. And so the city gifted us 4.83 acres to build on.
Mm-hmm.
Not many other cities have done this. We have this, and the land, of course, is right in the middle of 6 of the 12, well, now we found out there's 14 historically African-American communities. And so recently we had a community fall festival right on the land, which is in Newtown and near where Lake Edwards Park used to be. And people at first complained, well, will you get people coming? There will be problems. It went well. We had over 500 attend. The mayor came. The police came to give us something for our center, which was a portrait of the first 6 or 7 African-American police officers. So people who came out were people who may not go out to the beach. But it's in the community. We had Teens with a Purpose there, and many other. We had a variety show. We had candidates come out, and we just had a great time. And the faith base is very important. So they came out. It was actually giving back to the community. They came out for free, coming out, and we had other businesses sponsor that. We've also had like a little theater, and they did hairspray. And afterwards, I was part of the panels that discussed race relations. So we're making these efforts. And so I'm happy to see this because I also go to the Asian Hispanic when they're doing events, and also the Filipino, and I've learned a little Tagalog. But the point is, we are all in this together. And one group needs to support the others. So I've started something called Cultural Partners. And this way we can go to MOCA over things with the purpose, as they know, Zyder Theater, and we brought in a whole event called An Evening with Frederick Douglass. And we had Nathan Richardson, some of you may know him, author and poet, and he was right there on the front. And it was a complete diverse group. And we had 10% tickets for Title I, any kids who have never been to a theater like this. This is why this is important. You give them the opportunity and they come up, it put new ideas in their minds to one day be this person or that person, and that's what we need.
Yeah. Yeah. I was watching earlier today, again, just the coverage with Elijah Cummings, and he was talking about the day that he was sworn in. They played some old footage of him talking about the day he was sworn in and how his father was crying. And he said, "Are you crying because I'm now, a congressman?" And he said, "No, I'm crying because I'm thinking about the, historical aspect of today." And he said, "When I looked at your hand, I realized what I could be." You think about that, his father at the age that he was at that time, he said, "I'm seeing what I could be." And so sometimes it does take these events that are taking place for kids to see what they can be. We're about at the midway point of our conversation. Again, we want to hear from you all, so I hope you're jotting down or at least kind of keeping track of a few questions that you might have for when we get to that point in our time together tonight. I hope you're enjoying yourself so far in the conversation. We're going to take about a 10-minute break, and then we're going to come back and move the conversation forward. Thank you. We're going to continue our conversation. I'm missing a couple of panelists. Okay, one. Mama Turner said it's time to move them along. Okay, so now we have taken a historical look back at our region, and we're going to push things forward now. I have some of your questions. I will try to get to as many as possible. We may be able to take some more, but I probably have about enough. But we can still get more if you have more questions. So please continue to send them in. We'll try to get to as many as possible. But I do have 2 more shows. So let's continue. What challenges, and this is for Julian, do entrepreneurs and business professionals of color face in the region, and how can we begin to mitigate them? Also, how can the region's business community become more reflective of the region's diversity?
So that's a really good question. Entrepreneurs and business owners, we all face the same challenges: access to capital, hiring personnel, healthcare, just the typical stuff. But for minority-owned businesses, it becomes a little bit more challenging because sometimes we don't have access to those resources. Your old alma mater, Norfolk State University, has done a phenomenal job with the Norfolk State University's Innovation Center in downtown Norfolk. And it's geared and designed to help minorities kind of have that incubator and that place where they can go to get those resources. Kind of going back what I said earlier about your immigrant business owners, not only do they not know about the resources, but sometimes they don't understand. They don't read English and can't comprehend. And for us, it's really advocating for those business owners and simple things, kind of just doing the little different language plug-in buttons that you can hit, where you can see the information in any language, but yet on the other side, on the end user, it's all in English. So when they need to fill out licenses for businesses or pay taxes or whatever it may be, and those types of plugins with today's modern technology are very inexpensive. They're we have it on our website, and I think it's like $20 a year. But if you go to a majority of the city's websites, I know Virginia Beach has recently kind of added it to a bunch of theirs, but some of the other cities in the region don't have that stuff. So it's kind of just making both sides aware of saying, hey, look, there's resources available. Here's the right way to go about getting them. This is where you look for them. And educating the other side saying, hey, we need resources.
And this question is to all of our panelists. Whoever wants to hop in can, but it really does go back to Dr. Happ's response earlier when I said we're going to come back there. So we're going to start with you. Norfolk and other cities have slowly been dismantling public housing and low-income housing neighborhoods and encouraging mixed-income neighborhoods as a replacement. What impact has this had on the region in the past? And do you believe this practice is a solution to even improving schools?
Try again on the question, because I get the feedback here. So
Sure. So Norfolk and other cities, but primarily Norfolk right now, have slowly been dismantling public housing and low-income housing neighborhoods and encouraging mixed-income neighborhoods as a replacement. What impact has that had on the region in the past, and do you feel it could have right now? And do you feel like it could improve schools?
I think that's our only hope, as a matter of fact. We can never be equal if we're separate. And we've spent so much time and effort separating ourselves and making arbitrary dividing lines. I mean, it's no secret to know that the cities of Chesapeake and Virginia Beach were invented as part of massive resistance to keep Norfolk and Portsmouth from growing and from expanding and from having the resources to deal with their communities. I look at Portsmouth and, I'm a Norfolk guy and my loyalty's to Norfolk, but my heart goes out to Portsmouth because 70% of their land is not taxable. It's either owned by the federal government or owned by the state government, like the port authorities. There's no tax resources. And unless we can bring all of our communities together, rather than the things that divide us. So if housing and housing communities are dividing us, any effort we can make to expand our contact, our shared sense of community, our shared sense of purpose, and just our contact is going to make a difference.
I think that it makes a huge impact on the community, specifically when you talk about business and commerce. Bridging or bringing the communities together now opens up another avenue for business owners, small business owners, to get business. Now you have more purchasing power. You expose the different communities to the different cultures and the different parts of the city and businesses that are around. So it's huge, specifically for the economy as well, just here locally.
Do you ever feel like there's a loss, though, from that happening?
Yes, I do. Recently, I was in Norfolk. I won't say which, because I serve on several boards. And we were near where Old Dominion is. And I asked, what was the impact of now putting this business here? And the realtor, without thinking, said, in this day of gentrification, and he caught himself. I did not miss that.
She said she can't hear you.
I said, he mentioned, well, it's the age of gentrification. And then he caught himself, but it was late. It was out. In other words, sometimes something that's in the back of your head comes out. And this came out. And I thought about it, because now the Lambert's Point and all those families have been displaced. A lot of what's happening around, some of these families cannot afford to move into these new mixed income communities. But yet it is happening, and you've got to look how it is impacting the people, no matter what. If you peel the skin back of pigmentation, we all bleed red. It is important that the education and having the mixed income, we still end up having this separation. We've got to get away from that, have it a more economic empowered area. Even the places that you have, we've recently done a disparity study. Because what happened is certain people, you keep seeing one group getting more than the others. So what is that about? The point is, a lot of these gradual dismantling, the people are worried because they don't know where they're going to go. They don't know if they can afford these new, unless they're going to bring enough in the new empowerment zone to help them. If they do not have these resources, that culture, the arts, like I noticed at Teens with the Purpose, they have a little garden. All of those give people a sense of community. And we begin to lose it in the sense of profit. We've got to be careful.
And I think that's why our panel looks the way it does today, right? That's why we're here as a community in this very diverse setting, because we had 3 different opinions on one issue that's happening in our community. And it's, each person made an extremely good point, but you just saw it from 3 different ways. 3 different ways. Were you about to say something?
Yes. I think, too, we'd have to be honest about why it's happening. Is it the economic impact? And I think in many cases, to be honest, that's a pretty good driving force, but at what expense? So when you take a look at, how schools are funded, the federal government is about 7%. Then you have the city assessments at about 47%, and then, the rest being from the state. I always wonder how I could go to a school in Norfolk Public Schools and the school 5 miles away, that experience be totally different from mine that I cherished at Booker T. Washington High School. But it wasn't until I really started to take a look and see how schools are funded, that's where it lies. But it comes at the expense of, we're talking about just the integration of it. Like you said, at what expense? Do we really care about the overall student and their whole experience? Because it comes at the expense of the academic and social-emotional development of our young people. So that's one side of the coin. The other side of the coin is that it could be a beautiful experience. I'm fortunate to be in a school, where we have international students, and that's our academy, and the students have an opportunity to learn from different experiences. And you would be amazed, and I've been in a few school divisions, how many times I've heard, individuals when I'm enrolling a student, a teacher may say, oh, well, he's from such and such school division, or she's from such and such school, and I'll be honest with you, I've had, colleagues who've said, well, he came from whatever school, and I've challenged that and said, well, I came from Booker T. Washington High School, so let's have that conversation. What are we saying? Or when they look on my wall and they'll see James Madison University or Regent University, there's this shock and this awe. So my point is, I want every student to have an enriching experience, to be able to understand and share the history of the opportunity that they have. But as community leaders, trust me, our students are watching. They understand why what's happening is happening, and they're going to call it like it is. So if it's an economic move, okay, call it for what it is, but let's also explain how it could be a benefit and how our young people could really utilize and leverage their gifts, talents, and abilities to be part of the process to move the community forward.
I have an example that is happening today, right now. My Norview class of 63, we give a large scholarship, and last year they started giving a second scholarship in my name. But the way that the children are chosen, we send out an application. We do not see the child. We chose the children by their ability. We don't know who they are, what they look like, where they come from. We chose them by their ability. And this is what, and I'm going to say the whole United States needs to do. If we stop looking at color and look at the ability of a person, choose them from what they want to do, what they have accomplished, what they will do. Pick that person before you see them. Because if you pick someone unseen, you'll be surprised on what you get. They could be Hispanic, they could be Japanese, they could be black, white, pink, or blue. But it doesn't matter. It's the person inside. And that's what we need to bring together as people.
So earlier we mentioned equity and equality. Lavelle, I think you brought that up. How do you define equity as it pertains to the Norfolk and Virginia Beach communities and to the Hampton Roads region as a whole?
I read something, I'm not gonna say recently because I'm always reading, but it said, equality is giving everyone a shoe. Equity is giving everyone a shoe that fits. So what's happening right now is everyone has a shoe, but does the shoe actually fit? You know, within different segments of Hampton Roads, with all due respect, not everyone's shoe fits. But also by the same token, my race, with all due respect, isn't the same as your race, which isn't the same as your race. You know, so really giving students as well the tools, you know, by which to understand, again, the race that's before them. Like I work a lot with young African-American males, and within professional development, I ask them, and I ask educators rather, I said, what do you feel is society's perception of African-American males out the gate? And I have them write that answer down, you know, anonymously, and then I read it off. And as you may imagine, the response is often thug, criminal, gangster, have no goals. I'm like, can you really just have no goals? You know, worthless. You know, so I ask of educators, those are their answers. I ask young men in a separate venue, those are their answers. But the issue becomes the fact that we have to own it as educators, that ends up shifting and transferring into the psyche of our young people. So they end up with cognitive distortions and negative thinking. And they end up trying to break down those things and not understanding why things are the way they are or why society is responding to them in a certain way. So there's definitely room for growth with regards to equity, but we have to really be honest about where we are within our own worldview. So even when I speak with educators and I ask that question, they're honest about their answer, but they're answering it just the way it was stated. This is society's perspective. That's a safe way to, in some cases, say, well, this is really how I feel. But we're not ready to engage in that conversation because it's almost taboo. That's why I have a lot of respect for this organization, everyone assembled, that we can, you know, unmask ourselves and talk about where we are. But we're gonna have to really, really get real and say, why do I feel the way I feel? So in particular with our young men, as you talk about disproportionalities, you could look at, in my opinion, you can make data say what you want it to say, but in some cases, in many cases, the data doesn't lie. So when I'm looking at disproportionate rates of suspensions for African-American males or disproportionate placement of special ed students, that's an issue. So then the question really becomes, okay, why? It really becomes why. And those are not just conversations I think we need to have behind closed doors, but really we need to do an internal check, you know, of ourselves as adults and individuals to understand why we have various perspectives and worldviews. And the next level of that being, in what way am I transferring that to the individuals that I commune with on a daily basis, and how are they being impacted?
Yeah, my hat's off to Virginia Beach Public Schools that do the African American Male Summit. I think that's a very valuable and it was, you know, rare type of event that's being held here in this city, but a needed one especially because there are unique things that need to be talked about in an open forum. Yes. Were you getting ready to say something? Were you getting ready to add something, Dr. Hams?
Well, all I was going to mention is that, as you mentioned about how they are looked at, this is global, and it's sad. I'm originally from West Africa, and learning about African Americans over there is that if you walk down the street and there are 3 people walking, you can always tell who's an African American. Even though we all look we're all black. And I asked why. They say, watch how he walks. He has a, kind of a bounce in his step and so forth. And it was sad to hear what they were talking about is what is being sent and ingrained, that those guys aren't about anything. And so you coming overseas to hear that, you already have prejudged from the global aspect of people. And this is why we have to have this conversation about unmasking who we really are. When I work with students, I let them know you can be whatever you want. I am completely from another country, but I took education seriously, and it ended up me being on City Council of Virginia Beach. So sometimes I tell them you have your first African American on City Council.
I love it. I love it.
And this is key, this is important, because we have wonderful groups like the Pan-Hellenic groups, the women who go out there. I've never joined to be a Delta or AKA, but I admire their efforts for people to vote, for people to get out there, and the men, the effort, because I'm sure when they were younger, they heard this kind of knowledge. And this is why I push for that center, because it's going to be a key for passing that knowledge, celebrating the accomplishments of so many African American male as well as female who were kind of hushed down. They invented so many things, but it was kept hushed. And they need to know now so they can be our tomorrow people that can stand tall and be proud of who they are.
Kayla, did you want to add something?
Yes, I did. I hear a lot of us, saying that it's good that we're having this conversation. We need to have it out loud. But my question is, what is the solution after we leave? We can have conversation after conversation. We have been having conversation about race, inequality for years. My thing is, what is the solution? What do we do after we leave after here? Are we just gonna soak all this information up and not pass it to anybody else? Like he was saying, we have to do a reality check, even within ourselves. A lot of us are educators or past educators, and I want to go backtrack a little bit when you said who are, passing the baton down, who are we passing the baton down? We're passing the baton to this generation of kids who have been overlooked, who might not be A students, and we have all done this, that we look at the A students and, oh, that's our future leader, that's our future leader. But that C average student, that D average student, that E average student has as much potential as the one that has A's. And, just starting off in the education field, I have a lot of students who make C's, and I praise them just as much as I praise the ones that have A's. You got this, you rock. They still get awards in my classroom because it's honoring the little things that become big things. And that's how solutions get made. Not just having these conversations, but going out and reacting. It's easy to obtain something, but it's hard to maintain something. And when you maintain something, you have to keep pulling out the roots. You have to keep watering it. You have to keep, fighting for it and looking at it. You know what I'm trying to say? Just one prime example. When all that shooting was going on, still to this day, when black bodies was just dropping from left to right, one thing I truly appreciate was the Norfolk Police Department.
Who are here today. Let's recognize them.
Hey, y'all. So one thing I appreciate was the Norfolk Police Department linked up with Teens with a Purpose and said, we want to do something, not just for us, not just to change the narrative, but we want to bring our community together. So we had outings with the police officers. We went on trips with them. We had difficult conversations, and I know they sat in a space that was super uncomfortable for them to hear what young people had to say and how they felt, but they sat in that. And also to the Norfolk, the police department, while you're still here, we haven't done that in a couple of years, and I would like for us to get back to it, because that goes back to maintaining, because it's still going on right now, and if we want to change the community, it does not happen in 2 years, 4 years, 5 years. It takes time. So when y'all retire, your colleagues that's coming up, they will know we still have to have this conversation. And if you want to continue to have this conversation, we are at 700 East Only Road, but y'all should know that. So I'm down for it, and I'm done. I'm sorry.
So that's a perfect kind of segue to what I want to say, because I want to make 3 very key points into that, right? So one is, what is the solution? This is a solution, these individuals here. I hear diversity, inclusion, and then the E gets flip-flop between equality and equity, right, depending on who I talk to. And my first question is always, okay, you said it, now what are you guys actually doing about it? So challenge people who bring that topic up, because everybody wants to talk about it, but who's actually doing something about it, right? And that leads into what you were saying with the Norfolk Police Department. They have been super collaborative with the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce here in Coastal Virginia. Aponte and Acevedo, I think, are the two that have really integrated with us well. And it takes a little bit of time in building the relationship. All of our cultures are built around relationships. And it's not just showing up one time and say, hey, I'm kind of here and it's okay. It's saying, hey, I'm here every time, whether one person shows up, nobody shows up, but just having that constant presence starts to build the relationships. And over time, those relationships is what really gets you guys. And then I forgot the third one, so.
Good point. So, and would you all like to stand? We've had two conversations, 2 questions that led to, this is Chief Boone and the Norfolk Police Department. We appreciate you all being here with us. And we appreciate what you all are doing already in the community. So we're gonna get to some of you all's questions. And since we were speaking about schools just a moment ago, I'll start with this one. Can we please bring back prayer in schools? What steps do you think would be required to do so? I actually thought about this the other day, and I thought, we used to always pray before football games when I was in high school, and then of course they don't do that anymore. But you still have a chaplain that prays before the Senate convenes. And I said, that's kind of interesting. And I come from, I'm a PK, so my father's had that role before. But, it drew my attention to that. And so when I was looking at this question, I said, well, what do you think about prayer in schools?
I think it's definitely needed. I'm not gonna lie, it's definitely needed. But for whatever reason, there's a fine line. And I'll just leave it there, which I understand. But it's definitely needed, and I understand we're, different, in various faiths. But I know within our building, we do have a group of students who pray around the flagpole. I don't know if it's every other week or what have you. I wish it was daily. And I know I've chimed in, and joined with them a few times. But also, we do have a Christian organization, and they almost literally have church after school, and they're on the megaphone, and and the place is packed.
Wow.
It's packed, and that's a very much a thriving organization, within our building, which is supported. But I think it is definitely needed because it takes more than just showing up every day. So we're really talking about, again, the social emotional development of us as educators and as a community. Prayer changes some things. So we can't just say, oh, well, this needs to become better and that needs to become better. It's my belief that, there's definitely a higher power that, we definitely need to lean on, who has given us various gifts, talents, and abilities in order to shape the culture of education that we're in.
I'm going to, for these questions, go to just one person so we can get through as many as possible. Are there any barriers to inclusion of minority communities that came as a surprise to you? Any unforeseen hurdles that you had to overcome? Anyone want to take that question?
So I'll take it. So it kind of goes back to the equity question, right? So equity is having equal accessibility to resources. And it goes back to educating and making sure that the resources are available across the board. And then equity also means that understanding that there's barriers. And we have to recognize those barriers. One of the things that the military taught me, specifically the Marine Corps, was know yourself and seek self-improvement. And as a community, we have to understand that. And we have to say, hey, look, there's an issue, there's barriers, and here's what they are. And how do we make them better? How do we improve them? And how do we get past them?
Dr. Turner? Oh.
I was asked this question recently. With all the things that you've been through, why did you become a teacher? My answer was, they needed me. And they needed me because of the things that I have been through to become an educator. As I've often said, teaching has no money. We make the world, and a student that I taught goes out, becomes president, and makes 10 times more money than I did when I was teaching him. But even though I had it hard to walk to school, I am so proud to say I'm a teacher. I didn't see color. I still don't. I wrote a book called Today I Met a Rainbow because of that. And as I said before, when we as people start treating each other as people, not by the color of our skin, then we come together. But as it's been said before, we can't stop the ball from bouncing here. It must continue to bounce, because one day I'm not going to be in this world, but I hope that someone will remember that I said love and education go together.
And Dr. Turner, there is a question that was specifically for you that really goes to what you were just saying about having this love for children. They want to know about the opposite. So this question is about, and it begins with you, but anyone can hop in here, about the criminalization of school discipline practices and what can be done to keep our children in their classrooms and out of the juvenile detention center and prisons.
Okay, I can tell anyone, are there any of my old students here? Okay, that's good. I was the type of teacher who would say, you can't come in my classroom because you didn't do your homework. So here's what you're gonna do. You're gonna sit in the back of the class, you're gonna do yesterday's homework, you're gonna start today's homework, because this is important for you. I already did that homework. Now you have to do it. So, that's a hard question, and yet it's an easy question. And it's already been answered. We've got to look beyond today. And I did a program for the police department. They have a video, Come Together. I think there's a song that says, come together. Stop looking at what's in front of you. Look beyond this. Education is the key to success. Learn how to love. Realize everyone cannot go to college. Everyone doesn't need to go to college, but you can be the best person that you can be.
I think a couple folks wanted to hop in.
I think, too, I would challenge every school division to take a look at your discipline policies and practices, because those are not equal nor equitable either. Because when you take a look, If you take a look at many school divisions, minorities are, I'll say, disciplined, to use that term loosely.
It's a candid
Disciplined.
conversation, so.
All right, here we go. Punished. Minorities are punished for many behaviors that are very subjective. Insubordination. They were rude. So these things that are very subjective, which come through our respective worldviews. They were defiant. That's another big one. They were defiant. So that's very subjective. Whereas majority individuals are punished for things that are very objective: drug, alcohol, weapon, those type of things which you could really pinpoint and say, yep, here it is, it's confiscated, here's the consequence. So if we each have different worldviews and perspectives, we're each going to see something differently. So if you raise your voice at me, I may be the type that says, oh, who are you raising your voice at? Come with me, send to the office, and then I'm gonna send down a referral, and then you're out. Which is what led me into really engaging with educators about restorative practices, to say, how do you have that conversation? When that young man or that young lady you feel, again, we have to look in the mirror, you feel disrespected you. What was it that made you feel disrespected? Because in my opinion too, there are triggers. There are triggers. So with us as educators, our young people are triggers. In some cases, they may trigger something within us that reminds us of our children or ourselves or a former colleague or whatever the case may be. So what ends up happening is our children end up paying the price. And then when you take a look at the discipline data from schools, it's not much different from the prisons. So if they're building prisons based on third grade reading levels, you have kindergartners and third graders who are being suspended. And then that gets into the pipeline. And then that goes from there, and you have for-profit prisons, and it goes on and on. So it still comes back to the dollar as well. So to answer the question, we really have to take a look at our practices across the board, not just within the federal or state government, but also within our school divisions, because they are eerily similar.
Did you want to go ahead, Dr. Howard?
Okay, one of the things that I think you had part of the answer in an earlier question, where you talked about giving someone a shoe versus a shoe that fits. And in public education, we have a responsibility to make sure that we have a shoe that fits. If a kid won't come to school without wearing his hat, or won't come to school without wearing his pants except around his knees, we need to provide a school where he can. When I was with Norfolk Schools, we worked hard to provide alternative education opportunities. Places where kids could wear a hat, could catch up on their courses. We try too much to do one size fits all. And there are a lot of kids that need a different light at the end of a different tunnel. And that's part of our responsibility to recognize that, and to keep them moving forward, we have to provide those different lights. We tried hard to get the state to allow us to offer a pre-GED course to 16-year-olds. We knew if you got to be 16 years old and you hadn't amassed very many credits, you may not be able to pass Ms. Turner's math, but you could do the arithmetic that you were never going to graduate. So you needed to, we wanted the state to allow us to have a pre-GED, because GED is an acceptable end light, but it's the great secret in public schools, because we try to shoehorn everybody away from that. A kid that gets a GED doesn't count in the graduation requirements. And so suddenly it's a black mark on the school. It may be what's best for the student, but we're so worried about how we're measured in statistics that we're not providing a shoe that fits.
Can I chime in on something that you said? You made me think of something when you talked about hats and hoodies. I just want to share this quick story, and trust me, it's relevant. A lot of young men, women, they wear the hoodies. And I know a lot of educators who spend a lot of time saying, young man, take your hood off, take your hood off, take your hood off. And then that gets back to the subjective. So one day I was on lunch duty, and I was standing next to one of my colleagues, and they had asked a young man twice to remove his hoodie. So then they said to me, well, I've asked that young man 2 times to remove his hoodie, and there it is again. So he walked by, I never met him before. I said, come here, sir. So he says, yes, sir. I said, let me ask you this. I said, you have your hoodie on, correct? He says, yes, sir. I said, do you know the purpose of a hoodie, just from its origination? He said, no, sir. So I went on to let him know that the purpose of a hooded shirt really goes all the way back to the industrial piece, and what it was for factory workers, and it served two purposes. Number one, so that it would protect them from the elements for which whether they were outside or working with something to which there was debris falling. And then the second thing was this: it allowed them to focus on their craft. So I asked the young man, I said, so when you have your hoodie on, how does it make you feel? He's like, honestly, Mr. White, I'm just in my zone. Which, to be honest with you, which is the original purpose of a hoodie. But to give him that historical platform, I thought that was important, and I also shared it with my colleague, but I also said this. I said, listen, I get it. I said, have you been asked a couple of times to remove your hoodie? He says, yes, sir. I said, did you realize you put it back on? He said, honestly, sir, I didn't. I said, okay. I said, now let me explain to you perception. That's important. I said, so you're a young man who's been asked twice to comply, and then the optic of it is that you chose not to. So now you're on the threshold of there being a disciplinary consequence. I said, I need you to be aware that there's always someone watching, and they too have their worldview. I said, should we be in a society where you could wear a hoodie and go where you need to go or where you want to go? Yeah, we should. I said, but we're not. I said, by the same token, as we talk about optics, it's important to understand this. It's also a safety issue because you lose your peripheral vision. So if something happens down the hall, and this description that's given is, it was a young man with a hooded sweatshirt on, guess what, sir? You're one of three. I said, so definitely it's a safety measure, but I thought it was also important to share with him the historical, as my colleague, emphasis, the origination rather, of the hoodie. So we almost have to do this song and dance of, what's the hill we're dying on? And is the hoodie impacting their education? I assume that you could still hear me just fine, but our young men also have to know how to code switch, which can be exhausting, but you also have to understand the optics of where you are and the importance of you doing what it is that you're being asked to do. So there's a responsibility with that.
Yeah. We are almost out of time, so I want to get to a couple more of these questions. Can we talk about the divide between Norfolk and Virginia Beach along racial lines? Not all at once.
That I heard, I won't call any names, but I was one who was a strong, and I still am, of transportation. Because for housing, for getting to your jobs, if you don't have adequate housing or transportation of buses, that creates a problem. So when we came to look at light rail, multimodal forms of transportation, I was so adamant. Many in my city were not with me. I'd lost my next election on that. But then, one older gentleman says, we always love our cars. Do you realize if we bring this transportation that you're talking about, you're gonna have people from Norfolk coming over to Virginia Beach, to the oceanfront, maybe take our TVs or something. But you see the tiny mindset that he wasn't looking at how it was going to help the whole. Because a lot of Norfolk people come to Virginia Beach and work. And vice versa, Virginia Beach. But the mindset at that point was the I factor. I'm going to lose this. These people are now going to go over, and we're just not really far from each other. I can go and do something right now, head to Norfolk, to Town Point, come back to Virginia Beach, and interact. But sometimes it's an old, ingrained cultural mindset. And we have to get over that. That is all right to have someone come over.
Yeah, I'm glad you were candid about that, because
Well,
there
you
was
said
definitely an
unmask,
undercurrent.
and that's what I'm doing.
Yeah. Yeah. There was definitely an undercurrent during that whole conversation. Yeah. This question is for Julian. Speak to the ability to keep your language and what impact that has had on your community's ability to stay unified compared to, say, the Black community who was not originally allowed to keep their languages.
So, funny story. I think I was about 10 or 11 years old, and I got home from school, and my mom got home from work about an hour later, and I told her, hey, Mom, I don't like Spanish. I don't want to talk Spanish anymore. Next thing I know, she started speaking a foreign language. Her eyes rolled to the back of her head, and her arms were flailing all over the place. From that point forward, I knew that I was to speak Spanish for a very long time. So I knew. And the good old sandal came out, and I got a good whooping. So, but she made me, from that day forward, I had to write in Spanish after I did my homework and do kind of the alphabet and stuff like that. Joined the Marine Corps, and they sent me to the closest thing to Spanish in the Middle East. Don't know why they thought that was a good idea. And then from there, I actually ended up working in Mexico for numerous years, and Central America and Latin America. And that's when I realized the power of the Spanish language. Not only that, but just the nuances in the different dialects. My first time in Mexico, I had no idea what type of Spanish they were speaking, because Colombian Spanish is a little bit different. But as I learned, it has really, really made a huge impact in everyday business, just every day in the community, because I can communicate and I understand some of the issues that the community has because of that, and it helps connect me a little bit more. So it has been critical in kind of helping build and bridge that cultural gap within the community.
Right. And I just wanted, this wasn't a full question here, but they made a good point on the back of the card, so we're going to end with this here. It was about grassroots versus federal law, and on the back of the card it says, grassroots efforts can be effective only if they are supported by state and federal laws and courts. Vote. So we're going to end with that one vote. We've got important elections coming up next month. Vote. So we want to thank all of our panelists for being here with us this evening. Julian Baena, Kayla Walker, Dr. Amelia Ross-Hammond, Dr. Patricia Turner, Dr. Forrest Hap-White, and Lavelle White. We thank each and every one of you all for being here. I want to thank you for having me as your host, and I'm going to turn things back over to these lovely ladies.
Thank you so much, Anita. This has been a very powerful, very moving dialogue, and we thank each of our panelists for sharing their time and perspective with us tonight. We thank you, audience, for coming and sending us your questions and being engaged. Even if you didn't have your question read or didn't get a chance to speak, we hope that you will absorb some of the knowledge that's been shared here this evening. I'm going to go off script really quick. Vivian, don't give me the side eye. One of our panelists said earlier that they don't see color. I want to say emphatically, I do see color, okay? And in living in the United States in the day and time that we do, to choose to not see color could literally be a life and death situation for some people. There's nothing wrong with celebrating our differences. We are diverse. Diversity is what makes America beautiful. So I want to be very clear that our objective here tonight is not to whitewash, is not to just bleach out all the color. We do see color. We're humans. We are made to recognize our differences. The key is celebrating those differences and not letting them be something that separates us. Turn it over to Vivian.
Thank you, Samantha. I just want to say a few more thank yous before we leave tonight. This work is also guided by a 24-member advisory committee that has helped us go through this process, which we call the entire process beneath the surface, race and the history of race in Southampton Roads. So if we have any advisory committee members here, would you please stand? Or wave, Chief Boone. Thank you. I also want to thank our partners in this, our exclusive television partner, WAVY TV 10, and our exclusive workshop partner, Virginia Center for Inclusive Communities, who will be here on Saturday conducting a workshop. So I encourage you all to come back Saturday from 10 to 12 here at Old Donation School to go through a diversity and inclusive training along with the bias workshop. And then our other community partners are the African American Cultural Center of Virginia Beach, Council of United Filipino Organizations of Tidewater, Hispanic Chamber of Commerce of Coastal Virginia, Juneteenth Festival Company, Junior League of Norfolk, Virginia Beach, Teens with a Purpose, Thrive Young Professionals, Urban League of Hampton Roads, WHRO Media, and the YWCA of Southampton Roads. And then I also want to thank Dr. Erin Spence, Superintendent of Virginia Beach City Public Schools, who is also an advisory committee member, and Dr. Kelly Hedrick. She is a principal of Old Donation School, her staff, and the staff of Virginia Beach City Public Schools for hosting us again tonight. And so lastly, as I've already mentioned, we have the third day, which is this coming Saturday, October 19th, from 10 to 12 here at Old Donation School, where Virginia Center for Inclusive Communities will be joining us and conducting the workshop. So I encourage you all to come out. Also, please tweet your experiences, hashtag UnmaskingHR, and then you can also go to the website, unmaskinghr.org. So thank you for coming out tonight and have a great evening.